Hey guys, this is Mitch with Fine Point CGI, and today we're going to talk about how to create a weather app inside of Godot. So this was a highly requested tutorial because people wanted to see how creating an app inside of Godot would go versus creating something like a game. So we're kind of here to answer that question of if creating an app in Godot is worth it, or if Godot is really just for making games. So what we're going to do is we'll go through the process of hitting our API. We're going to design our main interface elements. Then we are going to go ahead and do a small 7-day forecast and an hourly forecast. And then we're going to talk about how to do some basic gesture navigation so you can swipe right and it'll move a panel over. Then we are going to talk about how to get the user's location and use that location data to actually show their proper weather. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to create our game manager, right? So this is a weather application, and I know game manager doesn't quite work in terms of name, but we'll call it game manager anyway, just because that's kind of what I usually like to call my main manager. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and click on user interface here. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and right click on our control node, attach a script, and let's go ahead and make the language C# since this is a C# tutorial. So what we'll do is we'll click on create, and it's going to go ahead and generate our solution. It's going to generate our C# project and create our API assemblies and things like that. Now you'll see VS Code open up, and VS Code is basically really good for C# development, at least for Godot specifically. So it's really quite useful. So now that we have our game manager, we're going to need a few things. So to get our weather for our weather application, we need to post out to an API. Okay. And to post out to an API, we could just use I think it's under system.net or system.http, and we could call out using our HTTP library. Now, the problem is that we can't do that inside of Godot because of the way that Godot sandboxes your code and the way that Godot handles your code. It doesn't quite work that way, if that makes sense. So it's just something that you're going to have to keep in mind, is that when you're doing HTTP calls, you have to use Godot's internal HTTP stuff. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and get our HTTP request node to be able to do HTTP requests. So we'll go back into Godot here. We'll go ahead and right click our control node, add an child node, and add an HTTP request node. And we're going to go ahead and link our node request completed back to our control node here. And you'll see that it didn't actually create our function here, so we're going to need to create it manually. So we'll say public void, and I believe its name is under, if I click on HTTP request and I right click and edit this, we'll just pull this data here. And then I believe we just paste it right here like so, and we will go ahead and do that. Now, it does have a few things that it returns, so we need to go ahead and implement those. So we'll say int result, comma, int response code, comma, string as a array, headers, and byte array as our body. Now, what this is it's basically the result that comes back from our HTTP request, whether or not it was successful or something like that. Int response code is the actual physical response code that we get back. So something like a 400 or a 200 or an 800. And this can give you a lot of clues on what could potentially be wrong if something's broken. String headers is the headers that come back from the HTTP request. So something like this is TLS, or, you know, sometimes developers embed stuff in the headers to kind of give you clues on what kind of data is in there. And the body is the actual body code. It's going to be the JSON code that's going to come back. Okay. And I'm going to tab this before I freak out for it not being well formatted. All right. So for us to do an HTTP request, we need to actually get a reference to our node. So we'll come up here to our ready. We'll say HTTP request is equal to get node HTTP request as HTTP request. And then we'll go ahead and say request dot request. And that's how we can actually request a URL. Now, this is where things get interesting, okay? We're going to need to find a weather API to hit to get back our data set, okay? And we don't really have a weather API to hit, right? We haven't signed up for any services or anything like that. So in this tutorial, we're going to use the Open Weather API, which is a free weather API as long as you don't exceed their request amount. So this is the Open Weather API. And the really cool thing about Open Weather API is that they will give you your weather in JSON format for you to be able to use in your own applications or things like that. So you'll see I already have an account, FindPoint CGI right here. But if you guys don't have an account, go ahead and create one. And when you create one, if you come over to your name and you go to your API keys, you'll see that you have a key right here. Now we're going to need this key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this key that they generated for me. And I'm going to come over to my game manager here. And I'm just going to add it in here. Public string API key, and I'm going to go ahead and make it equal to my API key. So now from here, we need to get a URL to fire out to get our data set. So if we come back to our Open Weather, you'll see that they have a section here called API. So if you go ahead and click on this, and if I go ahead and zoom in so you guys probably can see better, if you click on this, it will give you your different APIs that you can actually access. So you can see here, they have a bunch of different APIs that you can access. Now, you know, you could get the current weather data if you want to. You can get the hourly forecast, the daily forecast, climatic forecast, and you can get the one call API. Now, in this case, I'm going to pull the one call API here. And the reason why I'm going to use this specific one is because this one will get you the minute forecast, the hourly forecast, the day forecast, the historical data, any national alerts, and it's in JSON format. So it's really nice for you to get all your forecast data in one single call. Now, if you want to, you can go ahead and pull data from any of these as well, but for me, this one will be easy. So we'll go ahead and click on the API doc here, and we'll scroll down just a tiny bit. And you'll see right here, it'll say how to make an API call. And you can see right here, they have a URL right here that we can use. And you'll see that they have a latitude, longitude, exclude, and a app ID. Now we're not going to mess with exclude, at least not yet. We can get there when we get there, but this is basically what we need. So let's go ahead and just copy this HTTP URL here. And let's go back to VS Code and let's go ahead and hit quote, paste, and let's just paste that in here. Now for our app ID, we'll just go ahead and use our app ID. So we'll just hit plus and we'll say API key, and that will allow us to use our API key. Now for the latitude and the longitude, that's something that we're going to be able to fill in later when we get the user's location. But in this case, since we don't have the user location, let's go ahead and just look up our latitude and longitude. Now, I've already looked up the Detroit latitude and longitude. Detroit is where I'm from, so I'm going to go ahead and use this. Now it's 42 north, which means positive 42, and 8304 west, which means it's negative 8304. If it was 8304 east, it would be positive, and if it was 42 south, it would be negative numbers. So that's something to keep in mind. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and grab the 42.33. we'll come back to VS Code and we'll go ahead and say our latitude is 43 or 4233 and our longitude is 8304. And remember, I said that since we're north or we're west, we need to go ahead and make it a minus. And that's how the system recognizes that you are in the western side of the world, not on the eastern side of the world. So now that we have this, when this call happens, it's going to run this little function. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and print out the string that comes back from our request. So what we'll do is we'll say string s is equal to encoding dot utf8 dot get string, and we'll go ahead and pass in our body. And what that's going to do is it's going to parse it as a UTF-8 string, okay? And we'll come over to our little light bulb here, click on that and say using system.text. Okay, what this is going to do is it's going to encode that text, that byte data that came back as actual text. Because we don't know what kind of data could come back. We want to make sure that we encode it in some kind of format that we can understand it. Okay. What we're also going to do is we're going to do gd.print to print out our result. And that's going to allow us to get back our result and see if what we have works. So now if we go back to Godot here, and if we go ahead and hit play, you're going to see that it's going to say, hey, we should save our scene. So we'll call this main scene. We'll go ahead and hit enter. And it's going to build our project solution. And then once it's done, it'll go ahead and try to run, and we'll see what happens. Awesome. So you'll see that we got our JSON data set right here. So now that we have that, we're actually getting our data back from our API. Simple enough, right? That just basically got back all of our data. You can see that we have our minute data. You can see that currently it is 282.5 temperature units, right? Which isn't really something that works for me, right? Because it's not in Fahrenheit or Celsius. So we should probably make sure that we specify a unit of measurement, but we'll get there in a minute. So now that we have our data actually coming back, what can we do with this data, right? Well, first we need to cast this data into an object of something, of some kind, right? And unfortunately, this JSON data is just too big for us to be able to see it, for us to be able to create an object. And this object is going to be extremely complicated to put together. And that's where code generators kind of come in, okay? So what we'll do is we'll go back to Visual Studio. We'll go ahead and grab this bit of code here. We'll go ahead and copy this. And we'll come up here, open up a new tab here. We'll go ahead and paste, and then we got to get our app ID. So let's come up here, grab our API key, and then let's go ahead and paste that in as well. If we hit enter, you will see in our web browser, we get all of this data. Okay. And this is what we want. You see all of this crazy amounts of data. I mean, look at all this stuff. It's crazy. We have our dew point and our daily weather and things like that, right? Now, if we were to create all these objects manually, it would be an absolute nightmare to put together because it's something that is extremely complicated to build out. We'd have to manually input all of the things that we're interested in, and even then we might miss something, right? So what can we do to make this a little bit easier for us? Well, that's where a code generator kind of comes in. So there's a tool called JSON2C#. Now this tool, if I move this over just a tiny bit so you can see it better, this tool allows you to convert JSON to C# classes, and this will save you a bunch of time. And I have this linked in the description below. Same thing with the open weather map as well. I have both of those linked below for your usage. Now, if I just grab all of this, copy it, come into here, and I paste it into here, and then I click convert, it's going to think for a little bit, and it's just going to generate out all of those classes. And that saves so much trouble and time for us. So that's just something to keep in mind, and that's super useful. So what we'll do is we'll just basically grab this bit of code here. We'll copy it, and then we'll go into Visual Studio Code. We're going to make a new script, and we will call it model.cs, and then we'll go ahead and paste this in. And that'll basically cover the majority of our problems. It literally just built our schema for us. So that just is a really cool tip that I found recently when I was working on an application. We had this huge JSON model object that we had to deal with, and it was basically insurmountable for us to be able to build this all manually. So we used that exact tool to basically automate that process and reduce our workload. So now you'll see that we do have some problems here. You'll see that we have some red up over here and some red right here. The reason why is because we're not using systems.collections.generic because list cannot be found. So if we come over here, we click on our little light bulb, and then we go to using system collections.generic, we'll go ahead and add that in. And that should cover all of our issues here. Awesome. So now that we're at this point, right, we have our model object, we have our game manager pulling back some data. Now we got to take that JSON data and actually convert it over to our model object. Okay. So how can we do that? Well, the simplest way that I found to convert JSON data in my experience has always been with one of my favorite tools called NewtonSoft. Now, NewtonSoft is basically considered one of the industry standards when it comes to JSON parsing. So the easiest way to add it is to go up to our terminal here, click on New Terminal, and type .NET add package .NET add package NewtonSoft.json. We'll go ahead and hit enter, and we'll see if that will work for us. And that basically added it for us. So now we can go ahead and use NewtonSoft inside of our application. And that's basically how you add NuGet packages to Godot. For those of you who don't know what NuGet is C#'s package management system. And what a package is it's a bit of code for us to be able to use in our application that we don't have to build. So for instance, instead of us building a whole JSON parsing engine, we can just use NewtonSoft by saying, hey, .NET, add package NewtonSoft, and it'll just go ahead and add it. So now to use that package, all we have to do is we can basically just say root is equal to JSON convert dot deserialize object, and then we need to cast it as something. So we'll say root, and we need to pass in what we are converting. So we'll say S for our string. You'll see that we have a squiggly underneath here saying that, hey, this doesn't exist. So if we click on our little light bulb here and say using NewtonSoft.json, that will allow us to use that. Now, that's how simple it is to pull down a NuGet package and throw it into our project, which is amazing, really, if you think about how easy it is. So if we come in here and we hit enter, and we go ahead and say gd.print root, it's not going to work. And the reason why is because Godot doesn't quite know how to handle this root object. So I'm not really going to use it for that. But what I am going to use it for is for a breakpoint. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and click on a breakpoint, come up to our run and debug, and create a launch JSON file. And we'll say C# Godot. And if you don't have that option, okay, because right now it's building it, so I'm just going to wait for it to be done. If you don't have that option, make sure you install the C# Godot extension. So if you go to extensions right here in Visual Studio Code and type in Godot C#, you will see that we have the C# tools for Godot. So you want to make sure that you have this, because if you don't, then you won't be able to run your code in Visual Studio Code and debug it in Godot, if that makes sense. Or I guess vice versa, in Godot and debug it in Visual Studio. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and make sure that we have our breakpoint set here. We'll hit Control S, we'll click on Run and Debug, and we will turn on Play in Editor, and we will click on the little icon here. Now what this should do is it should launch our app, and then it should hit our breakpoint and allow us to walk through our code. And the only reason why we're doing this is because we want to make sure that all of our stuff kind of deserialized properly and that everything feels good. So let's let it sit there and let it spin for a second. Oh, it says that we haven't selected a main scene. So let's go ahead and select one, and we'll go ahead and select our main scene. Because we were using this icon, it didn't quite set our main scene. We had to do that manually. Now this is, I think, the second time we built our solution, but it's our first time with our NuGet package. So it's going to take a few seconds for it to kind of pull down the stuff and build everything and make it work. So we'll just have to wait for a little bit. All right, so you'll see that it has caught it. So if we come up to our root object, which in Visual Studio Code, if you look at this little left panel here, this is where all of our variables are located, local and global and things like that. So if we come over to our root, we click down on our root, you'll see that we actually have all sorts of data here. So you can see that we have our latitude, our longitude, our time zone offset. You can see we have our daily forecast right here. So we can actually open up our list and see, and it feels like it's, 277 units, whatever that happens to be. I believe this is Kelvin, if I remember correctly. Humidity of 72, a pop of 96. Our pressure is 1005, whatever that means. We're expecting to get 0.76 value of rain, which my guess is probably maybe millimeters or something. I'm not sure. And how much snow we're going to get, when our sunrise and when our sunset is set, and that's in UTC time. So that's pretty cool. So we get a lot of really cool data, and you'll see that we successfully deserialized that data and that quickly. We're only about 20 minutes or maybe 25 minutes into the tutorial, and we already have our data deserializing and ready for us to use. So now, what can we do with all of this? Well, first, we should probably display what the temperature is, and we should probably parse out some of this data to make it displayable for the user, right? So what we'll do is we will go ahead and stop Godot and stop our play. And we'll go back to our Godot engine here, and let's go ahead and build out a main interface. Now, how I'm envisioning this is to have two pages on this app. It's going to be, the first page is going to be like current weather in like a quick access 7-day forecast, and maybe like a hourly forecast or something like that. And then the next page will be a more in-depth 7-day forecast, something like, hey, it's going to be cloudy, it'll be like 77, and it'll be, this is the day, right? And the other one will be more of like a minimalist one, which will show similar information. So what we'll do is we will go ahead, right-click our control node, add in a child node, and let's add in a control node here. We'll go ahead and call this main interface, and we'll go ahead and come up to our layout and make it full rect. So that's why it's full screened. Now you'll notice that we have a widescreen aspect ratio here, and we don't really want that, right? Not for a app, right? Usually apps are not widescreen, they're usually landscape, right? If they're on your Android device or your iOS device, usually they're on landscape. So we'll go to project settings, and we'll go ahead and change that. So we're going to go ahead and change this to 600 and 1024 for now. We might want to mess with it later, but right now that's what we'll go ahead and set it to. I'm going to also scroll down, and we will go ahead and change our stretch mode to 2D, and we'll go ahead and set our aspect to keep width, so that way we can keep our width. And that'll allow us just to get a little bit more flexibility here and make it so that our application scales a bit better on the mobile platform. So go ahead and click on close. And what we'll do is we will go ahead and start building out this main page. Now this should be pretty quick, hopefully. So Let's go ahead and do that. So we'll go ahead and right click, add in a child node, and let's add in a panel. And this panel is going to serve as our backdrop, so our background color. So we'll go ahead and make that full rect, and I'm actually pretty happy with the color that we have. So we'll go ahead and keep that. If you want to change it, just go to your inspector, go to your custom styles, and you can kind of come in here and change it by doing a new style box flat and changing the color right there. Now, I'm just going to keep it with the same color because I do like that dark theme look. So what we'll do is we'll right click our main interface. We'll go ahead and add in a child node, and let's go ahead and add in a scroll container. And a scroll container is going to allow us to scroll up and down in our app. And the reason why is because we might not want to fit all the information just on this screen. We might want to have additional information that the user might want to, see below the actual screen. So we're going to allow us to scroll up and down, right? So go ahead and click on layout, full rect, make that full screen. So that way we have that. And you can't use a scroll container without having some kind of VBox or HBox container. So we'll go ahead and add in another child node and add in a VBox container. And that's going to allow us to stack our stuff on top of each other, if that makes sense. And this will make it a lot easier when we want to add multiple elements and have them work as a giant list. Because if you think about most interfaces that are in existence for mobile, they're all broken up in lists. They're literally just blocks of, interface elements working together. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and right click our VBox container, add in another child node, add in a control node, and let's call this our weather box. And we'll go ahead and make its minimum and maximum size a specific size. And the reason why is because we want this to actually, be the proper size for our interface, if that makes sense. We don't want it to be scrunched because it's going to affect all the children elements underneath it. So what we'll do is we'll set the minimum size to 600 by something like maybe 600 or maybe 400. We'll see when we get there, but I think that might work. And then what we'll do is we'll right click our weather box, we'll add in a child node, let's add in a label. And that label is going to be the weather amount. So we'll just say something like 89. Now it is really quite small, so we're going to need to probably put in our own font to help make it so that it's the proper size, because we don't want it to be this tiny, right? But we'll get there when we get there. So we'll just leave this like this. And then we'll go ahead and right click, add in another child node. Let's add in a texture rect, and that's going to allow us to have some kind of image. And we'll just go ahead and put this here. Now, this image that we're going to have will be something like a sun or a rain cloud or maybe a thunder cloud if it's thundering. We'll go ahead and grab our label. We'll duplicate it. We're going to drag it down here below our texture rect. So something right about, providing that I can grab it. Let's put this below it maybe. There we go. And we'll just put it somewhere in this general area. And that's going to allow us to basically have a text label underneath to kind of describe the weather. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this label to temp. I'm going to change this to weather icon, and I'm going to change this to weather description, and I'm going to change this to say something like clouds. That way we have some information here that we can actually work with. Now, something else that a lot of weather apps need is the ability to tell you when the sun is rising and sun is setting. So we'll go ahead and add that in as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my weather box. I'm going to add in a child node, and I'm going to go ahead and add in a texture rect again. And we'll go ahead and call this nighttime texture. And we'll just kind of move this down below the clouds. And we'll go ahead and duplicate this, call it daytime texture. And we will drag our nighttime texture. And we'll go ahead and move our nighttime texture down below our daytime texture. Now, something that's going to make this a little bit easier is if we can go ahead and just set our textures. So I'll drag some icons into here to just kind of make it so that they exist. So we'll go ahead and drag them in like so. And I'm going to make it expand so we can have like a full-sized icon here. That way we have something we can look at, because it's really hard to tell what we're doing here. Now, what we'll also do is we're going to need some labels here. So I'm going to grab the weather description. I'm going to duplicate that and put it over here like so. I'm going to duplicate it one more time and drag it down here as well. I'm going to change the label from weather description to daytime text. And I'm going to change this one to nighttime text. And that's going to give us our day and night times for our app here. So now that we have all of this, we need to go ahead and set all of this. And we don't really have icons yet, so we're going to need to get there. But at least let's just set this stuff up so we have something working here. So what I'll do is I'll come up to our main interface. I'm going to right click on it, attach a script, and call it main interface.cs, and it will go ahead and create ourselves a nice class here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function called set main interface. So we'll say public void set main interface, and we're going to go ahead and pass in a root object. And that root object is our weather information, right? So we'll go ahead and tab this over before I get upset, and we'll go ahead and say rich text label temp label is equal to get node quote, and we'll need to go ahead and pass from here to our temperature label here. So that is going to be scroll container, VBox container, weather box, and then temp. So we'll say scroll container slash VBox container slash weather box slash, and we will say, I believe I called it temp, as rich text label. And then what we'll say is we'll say temp label dot text is equal to our root dot, and you'll see we have a bunch of options here. We want to get our current, right? So current dot, you'll see we have more options here. And you'll see that we have all sorts of crazy stuff. So what we need to get is we need to get our temperature, right? So temp, right? And you'll see that we have a squiggly bar underneath here. And it's saying, hey, you can't convert type double to string. Well, what we can do is we can just hit dot to string. And that will go ahead and solve that problem. We are converting that data to a string, so that way we can set our text to that value. And then what we're going to do is we need to go ahead and set our value down here, right? We need to set our cloud's value. So what we can do is we can come in here and say, all right, copy this, right? Because we don't need to redo our work. We can just say rich text label, temp label. Let's rename it to, I believe this is weather description. So we'll go ahead and get rid of this and say weather DESC label. And let's go ahead and come over here and say, I believe I just called it weather DESC. So we'll rename this, copy it, and then paste that in there. And we'll go ahead and copy this, paste it here. And we'll say, instead of doing our temperature, we'll say root.current.weather. And you'll notice that weather is a system.generic.list. So what we can do is we can just pull back the first element of that list and grab in our main. And our main is our value of the weather. So it'd be something like cloudy or something like that. Now, how I know this is probably a good thing for me to explain. So if I go back to our JSON here and I grab it all, and then I go ahead and I go back to VS Code, if I open up a new text doc and I paste this and I change this to JSON, I want to make sure that this is JSON, which it is. It auto-detected it correctly. And then I hit Control-Shift-P and I format my document. you'll see that you can see all of your data in a really easy, accessible format. So what we're doing is we're coming in here, we're grabbing our current weather right here, we're grabbing our weather, and then we are grabbing our main, which is clouds. Okay, so that's how we can go ahead and pull back this data set, if that makes sense. So now that we know that, let's go ahead and set our sunrise and sunset. And you'll see that we have our sunrise and sunset right here. So what we can do is we can go back to our main interface, come in here, and basically do exactly what we just did here. So we'll just copy this little bit of code here. And I know it seems kind of horrible to copy and paste code, but the reason why we're doing it is because it's just repetitive code that we're going to need to copy and paste, if that makes sense. So what we'll do is we will go back to Godot here real quick, and you'll see that we have our daytime text and our nighttime text. So if we just go back to VS Code, change this to daytime label and nighttime label, and we just copy and paste and copy and paste. And then we come over here and we make sure our get node is the correct node, which in this case is daytime text and nighttime text. So we'll say daytime text and nighttime text. And I probably should not do that. There we go, because I believe that's what we have it as. No, we do have capital T's. Wait, do we have not capital T on? We do. So we should probably pick a standard. So I guess we'll go with uppercase, which means we're going to need to make that change across the board here. So we'll just say daytime and nighttime. And then I'm going to want to change this as well. And we'll want to lowercase our d for our variables because, or lowercase our first part of our variables because that's just standard. We'll go ahead and paste that there and paste that there, and that'll basically handle it. So what we can do is we can pull back our current dot and we can say sunrise, which is our daytime, right? And you'll see that we get a squiggly. So if we hover over, it'll say, hey, you can't convert an int to a string. So dot to string. Go ahead and use that. And then we are going to do the same thing here. Dot current dot sunset dot to string. There we go. And I already know what some of you are thinking, the ones that have a little bit more C# experience. Yes, we're going to convert this to a date time. Don't worry. But right now, we'll use it like this. So we'll go back to our Godot engine. We'll go ahead and hit play. And let's see what it does. So it's going to sit there. It's going to think. And we have a crash. So that's always a good sign. So let's go ahead and go to our errors. And you'll see that we have an exception. Input string 0.01 is not a valid integer. Path hourly UVI line 1. So you'll see that it failed to parse our integer. Now, this is something that we're going to need to fix eventually. And the reason why is because UVI and things like that might not necessarily be a double or a integer or something like that. So we need to account for that as we do our coding. So what we can do is we can go to our model object. We can find UVI here. And we'll go ahead and change this to a float. And then we're going to also have to go and find any other UVIs in our set here. So if we just hit Control F to find it, we scroll down here, you'll see we have another one. So we'll say float. And you'll see that we have another one. So we'll say float. And we're going to need to fix these quite a lot. So there's a possibility, like for instance, this double might not work for snow. Or maybe for pop, we might need to change that. Or for instance, clouds, so that's something that we're going to have to look at just in case. But right now, we'll go ahead and keep it the way it is and just fix it as it comes. So now, before we test this, we need to go ahead and call this function. So what we'll do is we'll go back to our game manager. And right here where we do our HTTP request, what we'll do is we'll just say main interface is equal to get node. And I believe we called it main interface. So we'll go ahead and grab that. We'll paste that in as main interface here. And something that can help you guys out when you're doing something that only requires a single call. So like, for instance, we're only going to call this once. Something that I found that's super useful is instead of just saying main interface dot and then calling it, so you can say something like set main interface, right? And we can pass in our root object, root, like that. This is valid C#, but what we can also do is we can actually get rid of this. We can put this in a parentheses like so, and then we can just drag this up here like that, and that is also valid C# code. So that can solve and scrunch up your code a little bit to make it a little bit easier when you're only using this object once. So if you need to use the object a few times in your function, it's probably not a good idea to do it this way. But if you're only using it once, which in this case we are, it's simpler to do it this way than it is to do it the other way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S. I'm going to go to Godot and I'm going to hit play. We will go ahead and let that run and see what it does. And we have a crash. So let's go ahead and look at our debugger and you'll see object reference is not set to an instance of an object. So that's a good sign. Let me see. So it's mad at me because of set interface. So let's take a look at our code here versus what we have here. So scroll container. So main interface, scroll container, VBox container, weather box, temp, and that should be correct. That is our rich. Oh, I know what I did wrong. This is a label. This is not a rich text label. That's my fault. So let's go ahead and copy this and paste it. We might want to change these to rich text labels eventually, but let's go ahead and just do that for now. And let's retry this. Let's go ahead and hit play. So it's going to go ahead and call out to our API. And you'll see that it looks like it worked. I don't know if you guys can see it because it's so small on your screen, but if I kind of try to zoom in a bit, maybe I can come up with a way to make this a little bit bigger on your guys' screen. But you'll see that it does have data, which is awesome. That's exactly what we wanted. So you can see here we have our temperature, which I believe is in Kelvin. It is cloudy, which is good. And we have our sunrise and sunset times. Now, these are extremely hard to read. So let's go ahead and solve that and parse that data. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and hit close. We will go back to our C# project here inside of Visual Studio Code, and we will go ahead and go to our Explorer and make a new C# file, and we will call it utilities. And I always have a utilities.cs class. It's very useful to have, and it's super easy to put together. Now, in a utilities class, it's always stuff that you use all the time. So it's stuff that's just kind of there for us to use that a bunch of people are going to share. So what we'll say is public static class utilities. Now, we're making this static. And I don't know if you guys know what static is, but it basically means that it's accessible globally throughout the entire project. And the reason why we want to make it static over top of anything else is because it's a utilities tool, right? I want it to be usable for everybody in the entire project because it's a utility, right? So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create a parsing for Unix timestamp, which is what this is. That timestamp is a UTC Unix timestamp. So what we'll do is we'll say public static date time Unix timestamp to date time, and we'll pass in an integer, and we'll say timestamp, and and we'll go ahead and open and close curly brace. Now you'll see that we don't have our date time, right? So let's go ahead and click on this little code action, and we'll go ahead and use system, and that will go ahead and solve that problem. Now you'll also see that, hey, you guys are not returning anything, right? Not all code paths return a value, so that's okay. We will return something in a second and solve that problem. So we'll say date time is equal to new date time. And when you initialize your date time, you can set what the time is. And I'm going to set it to the Unix timestamp. So that's going to be 1970, comma 1, comma 1, comma 0, comma 0, comma 0, comma 0, comma date time kind dot UTC. And that will basically initialize our date time with the proper UTC time zone for Linux. And then we'll go ahead and hit enter, and we're going to say date time is equal to date time dot add seconds. And we'll go ahead and add in that timestamp. So we'll type in timestamp dot to local time. And that's going to go ahead and convert that to our local time instead of being in UTC time. Okay. And I'll explain this way more in depth in a second as soon as I finish this. So we'll go ahead and hit return, and we'll return that date time. So what does all this do? Well, what this does is I initialize my date time here, and I initialize it with the 1970 first month, first day, 0 second, 0 hour, 0 minute, 0 second, 0 millisecond. And then I say it's in the date time UTC. Now, this is basically me saying that I'm expecting a UTC time, which is what I get back from the weather API. And they say that inside of their API, so that way you guys understand where I'm getting this information from. They actually tell you right here, shift in seconds UTC, sunrise time Unix UTC. So that's how I know that it's a Unix time and that it's in UTC, which is why I picked UTC and I picked this specific timestamp, because that's the Unix timestamp for UTC. And then I need to add the amount of time that I have in my timestamp to my date time, because what this number is, it's the number of seconds from Unix time to when the sunrise is going to happen. So think of it kind of like if you take the number of seconds between now and 1970, that's what that number is. So I'm adding those seconds to get to our future time, and then I'm setting it to our local time. So it's no longer a part of UTC. It's actually, in my case, it's Eastern time. So Eastern Standard Time. And then I return that data. Okay. So we're going to go back to our main interface, and we're going to go ahead and use that. So what we'll say is we'll come over here and we'll say utilities dot Unix timestamp to date time, and we'll go ahead and pass in our integer sunrise time. And then we're going to go ahead and toString that, so that way we are stringing our date time label. And then we'll go ahead and copy this. We'll go ahead and paste it over here and do the same thing here. So now if I run this project here, you'll see that we will have a date timestamp instead of those seconds. You'll see that it says, you might not be able to see it. Like I said, I'll probably have to figure out a way to zoom this in, but it says 3/30/2022 at 7:17:56 a.m. it looks like. And the other one says same thing, but 7:54:59 p.m. Now, we already know the date, right? That's today. So we know that we don't actually need this timestamp, right? We just need the actual time. So what we can do is we can come over to our VS Code and we can say dot, and if we scroll down you'll see we have all sorts of stuff. And what we can do is we can just say dot time of day dot toString, and that will go ahead and pull back just the time of day. So if we go ahead and put that in there, and then we come back to Godot and we hit play, you'll see it's just going to return back the time of day, which is exactly what we want. So that's perfect. So next, let's go ahead and fix our font size here. So what we need to do is we need to download a font for us to use. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and go out to Font Awesome. Dafont. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my web browser. And you can see here's dafont.com. And dafont.com is really cool because it's got a bunch of fonts that you can use for your projects. Now it depends on what the license is, and you can see over here free for personal use and things like that. So make sure you guys pay attention. And if I go ahead and zoom in a tiny bit for you guys, you can see right here it says free for personal use. So that means you can't use this for commercial use. So you'll need to keep track of what type of license that you are downloading with your fonts. In my case, since this is a tutorial, I can download whatever font I want, so it doesn't really matter because I'm not going to be using this for commercial purposes. But just make sure you guys check that because licenses are really important, especially in the industry, and I don't want you guys to get caught up in any, copyright issues in the future. So let's go ahead and go out to our basic sans serif, and let's see if we can find a cool font that we can use. So let's go ahead and pull down maybe this one, Barbas Nue, I think it says here. And we'll just go ahead and download this one. And you'll see that it downloads to my download folder and it already extracted, which is awesome. And we'll go ahead and just kind of grab these font files here, just these two. We'll go ahead and copy them. And then we're going to have to go out to our project. So in my case, it's documents. And I believe it is under, if I scroll down, it's called Weather App. I'm going to go into there. I'm going to go ahead and paste my fonts into here. And then if I reopen Godot here, it should show up right here. So now I have my fonts here. So now I can actually go to either my specific label here, or I could set a theme up for my entire project. It's up to you guys on which one you guys want to do. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and select my main interface. I'm going to come to my theme. I'm going to add in a new theme. Go ahead and click on that theme and you'll see that it opens up our theme panel. Now the theme panel is really cool because it allows us to really build out our theme across our entire project, right? So I'm going to make it so it's only part of the main interface. That way, if I need the flexibility for maybe my second screen, I can go ahead and do that. Now, what I'll do is I'll come down here and I will click on this little plus icon here. And I'm going to type in label. And what that's going to do is that's going to pull back all of the labels that are underneath this object and allow me to adjust the font size. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus icon, click on the default font, do a new dynamic font, and you'll notice that all of our font has disappeared. And the reason why is because we are adjusting all of the fonts and we don't have a font loaded yet, so it doesn't show anything. So now if I click on this dynamic font, I go to font right here, you'll see it says font data empty. If we drag our font into here, you'll see suddenly everything starts using that font, which is awesome. So now I can come up to my settings and I can change my font size to whatever font size I would like them to be. Now I'm going to set to something maybe 30, and then let's go ahead and move our text just slightly down. If we just grab all of this and just move it just a little bit down, give it a little bit more space, maybe chunk it so it kind of matches up over here. And I'm going to go ahead and go to this weather temp here for our temperature. And I'm going to come down here to its theme, and I'm going to go to override fonts, and I'm going to go ahead and set it to be a part of a new dynamic font as well. And I will go ahead and throw in my regular font as well. And I'll go to my settings and I will change this to be a much larger font, something like, 140 or so. We'll say 145. And I'm going to go ahead and just put it right about here-ish, so it just kind of matches with what I'm trying to do here. Awesome. So you can see our weather box is basically done. So we have what type of weather we have, the time, the sunset time, the sunrise time, and the actual weather itself. And like I said, we'll get our icons in a second and settle that. All right, so now that we have our fonts in place, let's go ahead and add our icons. Now, the icon set that we're going to be using is the weather icon graphics by MS Rana. I'm not really sure how to say that, but it's by this guy, and it's a really cool icon set here. So yeah, be sure to download it and use it. Now, so when you download it, open up the main file, you get this encapsulated PostScript file. So you actually have to take this PostScript file and convert it over to PNGs and export it out. Now, I've already done that for us. So I actually have all the icons right here already built out for us. So I have a link to that in the description below that you guys can go ahead and download. And I want to thank this guy for making all these cool icons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and extract my icons. And I will go ahead and pull all of these icons into Godot. So I'm going to open up Godot. I am going to right click, create a new folder and call it Weather Icons. And I will right click, open in File Manager, and then tab back over to my icons here. And let's drag and drop them in, and that's going to allow Godot to import them. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. It's going to import them, and there we go. Simple enough, right? So now that we have them imported, they're right here. We can go ahead and create a small bit of code that's going to load in those icons and display them based on what we need, right? So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and go into our main interface here. And when we do our label call, we're going to need to determine what icon we need based off of what the weather is. So what we could do is we could create a function in here to basically say, hey, if the weather is this type, let's go ahead and use this icon, right? But if we do that, that's going to make it so that we can't use it elsewhere in the application, unless, of course, we instance the main interface and then access it from there. So instead, let's go ahead and add it to our utilities function. This is why we have a utilities function. It's so that we can actually use it cross different screens. So what we'll do is we need to get references to our files first, right? So we can have those textures in memory. That way we can access them, right? So what we need to do is first we need to create our class variables that houses all of those textures. So what we'll do is we'll say public static texture. And you'll see that I'm not getting any auto completion. And the reason why I'm not getting auto completion is because I'm not using the Godot engine. And now you'll see that I am now getting auto completion here. So we'll say public static texture. We're going to say sunny is equal to resource loader dot load. And we'll say quote res colon slash slash. And we have our icons. If you come over here, you'll see weather icons and then our icons. So we'll say weather icons slash, and then we'll go ahead and load our icons. So in this case, if we scroll down, it'll be called sun.png. So we'll say sun.png. And there we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this a few times, something about there or so. And then what we'll say is moon, and our icon will be moon.png. Our next texture is partly cloudy, and we'll do partly cloudy. Next one is rain, and we'll do rain. Next one is, I missed partly cloudy moon, so we'll say partly partly cloudy moon, and we'll go ahead and just grab that right here. This one is semi-cloudy, and we might not use all of these, but we might as well load them all. That way we have them in case we need them. Small rain. Small rain. And then our next one, let me see. Small rain, sun, thunderstorm. And thunderstorm, and it looks like I spelled thunderstorm wrong. So this will be fixed in your guys' end, but I'm going to rename this to STORM. There we go. And I will say thunderstorm. That'll work. And let me see. We started off with sunny. We did moon, I think. Let me see. Moon, partly cloudy. Okay. So we have to come back up here. So that's my fault. So I have to go from cloudy to heavy rainstorm. So we'll need a few more. And we will do cloudy. Cloudy 2. Cloudy rain. Cloudy rain. Cloudy thunderstorm. Cloudy thunderstorm. And finally, heavy rain. Heavy rain thunderstorm. And we're going to go ahead and put that in as well. And there we go. So those should be all of the different ones that we need. Now, something I forgot intentionally was the casting. You can see that you can't implicitly cast these things. You can see how they're all have that red symbol here. So what we can do if we wanted to solve this is we could have just said as texture, and that would solve this issue. You can see we're casting it as a texture. But we made a mistake, right? All of these are not being casted, and going through and saying as texture is a pain. So what we can do is we can hold Alt and just click on each one of these like this. And then we can just hit backspace as texture. And that will allow us to do a mass edit, which is super useful when you're when you have a lot of variables that you need to cast or need to do something all at once. You could just do it right here. So now that we've got that done, let's come down here and let's go ahead and create our utility function. So what we're going to do is we'll say public static texture set texture, and then we'll go ahead and pass in a string which will be our weather. Okay, and what we're going to do is if we look back at our JSON data set, you'll see if we scroll up, you'll see that we have our main, and our main says a thing, and we also have a description here, okay? And we can use this main or this description to kind of determine what we want to say, right? What icon we want to show. So in my case, I'm going to go off of main, so I'm just going to do the basics, so cloud, clouds, drizzle, rain, snow, thunderstorm, things like that. So that's what I'll do, but you guys can go ahead and do, whichever one you want if you want to be more detailed or less detailed about it. So I'll go to utilities and I will say switch, and I'm going to use this little box here. And this box basically means it's going to be a switch statement. So we tab and you'll see that it creates our switch statement for us. And we'll say we're going to do that on weather. What we'll do is we'll say case quote thunderstorm colon return thunderstorm, like that. And then what we can do is we can basically just copy this little bit of code, hit enter, paste, 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 and then we can just change this from case thunderstorm to case drizzle, case rain, case snow, case clear, and we'll do one more, which will be clouds. So we'll go ahead and paste that and say clouds. And then for drizzle, we'll go ahead and return rain. For rain, we'll go ahead and return rain. For snow, we don't really have a snow icon. If we look at his icon set, you'll see that we don't have an icon specifically for snow, although we do have this single rain icon, and that might be useful for us. But let's go ahead and just use rain for that as well. Lots of rain. For clear, let's use sunny. And for clouds, let's use semi-cloudy. Now, we do have some options up here. And you can see we have all sorts of stuff. Partly cloudy, semi-cloudy, small rain. Maybe we should use small rain instead of rain for drizzle. So we'll come down to drizzle and just say small rain. There we go. And that'll just do that. And that should do it for us. So what I'll do is I will say on default, return sunny, and that'll just go ahead and pull back sunny just in case if for some reason we can't get our weather back, we can just go ahead and just return sunny, and that should work. And if we hit Control-Shift-P and format our document, that'll fix the formatting here. So that way it doesn't look awful when we come back to it. So now let's go back to our main interface and let's come in here and say parentheses get node quote. And if we look at our section here, we're going from our main interface to our weather icon. And we already have a get node scroll container weather box nighttime text. So we could probably just pull all of this to save ourselves a little bit of trouble. And then we can say weather icon. And that'll pull back our weather icon as long as I don't have that extra quote. And then we can just say as texture rect. And then we can come in here and hit dot. And we can say texture is equal to, okay. And what we need to do is we need to call out to our utilities function. So we'll say utilities dot set texture. And then we need to pass in our current weather. So we'll say root dot current dot weather, get back the first index dot, and we will pass in, I believe we wanted to do main. And then we will go ahead and hit our semicolon. And that should pretty much do it. So now if we hit play, like so, it should show our Godot icon. It'll pull back the weather, and you'll see that it shows our weather icon. Now that weather icon's a little squished, which isn't great. The text is a little squished over here, and you can see that we have the wrong units, so we'll have to fix that. And over here we do Fahrenheit, so I'm probably going to tell it to do Fahrenheit, but you guys can of course set it to Celsius if you'd like. And we got to set these two icons as well. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to come to my weather icon, and I'm going to go ahead and drag in partly cloudy. And that should work. Let's see. Yeah, that should work. So I wonder why it came out a little funky. Was it because... No? No, that should work. Okay. Well, that works. It just seems a little squished. So maybe I'll pull this over a tiny bit. I might not be in perfect resolution. You guys will probably be in perfect resolution. But for some reason, mine are not. So I'm going to double check that before I upload it. But we'll go ahead and just use that as is. And we're going to come down to our daytime text. We're going to go ahead and give it a sun icon like so. And we'll say expand, and that's fine. And let's just kind of adjust it so it fits just right. And then we'll go ahead and grab our nighttime, and we are going to set that to a moon. And we're going to go ahead and click expand and make that just slightly bigger so that way it matches. There we go. And that should do it. Awesome. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and set up our weather for the next few days. So we're going to have a section here that basically shows us what the weather's going to be like for the next few days, right? So it's basically saying, you know, it's a small snapshot almost of what the weather's going to look like. So what we'll do is we're going to come in here, go to our VBox container, add a child node, and add in a control node. And then what we'll do is we'll add in a hbox container. And that's going to allow us to basically have a nice column structure for us to put our daily forecast in for the next 5 days. So from here, what we can do is we can go ahead and right click, add in a child node. Let's add in a control node. And that control node is basically going to be our daily forecast. And we'll go ahead and call this control node weather day short. And then we'll go ahead and right click it, add in another child node. Let's add in the texture rect here. And let's go ahead and right click the weather day again, add in another child node, add in a label. There we go. And we'll need to go ahead and make sure that we override our label because I got a feeling that this text might be too large, but we'll see. So let's go to our texture rect. Let's add in something like heavy thunderstorm, like so, and make it expand. And then grab our label and say 77 for the degrees. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this down just underneath our little weather day here. And if we control D and duplicate this a few times, you'll see that we have them overlapping. So what we can do is we can go to our hbox container, we can go to our theme overrides, go to constraints, turn on our separation, and let's just bring up the separation. Now, when we do our weather day, we need to actually just duplicate this until we get all 7 days, right? Because we have a 7-day forecast. If I remember correctly, if we take a look at our data set here and we get rid of hourly and we look at daily, if we look at how much data there is, so there's 1 day here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days. So this looks like this is probably the current day and then 7 days after that, which is perfect. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and add 7 of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Nice. So now that we have that, we can take a look at our hbox container, take a look at our weather day, make sure that things are the correct size, make sure that things make sense. And in my case, I don't think it does quite yet. So what we'll do is we'll make this just a touch bigger, maybe move this down just a tiny bit, like so. And then I will delete these guys, drop in 7 more. And I know that some people are probably going, why not just do it via a new scene? And you're completely correct. That's probably the best way to do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then we will go ahead and up our separation. And I think that will work. That's good enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly what I said earlier. So we'll delete this and we will go ahead and click on our weather day, right click it, save branch as scene, call it weather day short, and that's perfect. Go ahead and open up that scene and let's take a look at it. So you'll see that A77 needs to move down just a tiny bit. So we'll go ahead and do that and we'll make it about right there, and that should do it. So go ahead and hit Control S. And I'm going to right click weather day short. I'm going to attach a script and call it weather day short, and we'll go ahead and create that. And the reason why is because we need to take that passed in data and we need to set our values for these objects here. So we need to actually come in and set these two. And it's a lot easier when you can just do it via your own script. So what I'll do is I'll move this over a tiny bit and we'll come in here and say public void set texture and label data. And we could pass in a root object or something like that, like all of the data set if we want to, or we might want to just pass in the subset of data we're interested in. So we have this thing called daily right here. So we could just pull back our daily instead, and that would reduce the amount of data we're passing through. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll just pass in a daily weather data. And what we'll do is we'll say parentheses get node quote texture rect as texture rect dot texture is equal to utilities dot set texture, and then we'll say weather data dot weather, the 0 index of that dot main, and that will pull back our proper texture. And then we're going to do the same thing, get node quote and label as label dot text is equal to weather data dot temp, and that will set our temperature as well. And we're going to need to pass that as a .to string so that Godot is happy. Awesome. And simple enough. So now we can just use this and it basically will solve our problems. Okay. So now we need to go ahead and instance this in our main scene, right? Because our HBox container needs to instance all 7 of these objects and, you know, go ahead and populate their data sets. So what we'll do is first we'll delete this weather short because we don't need it. And we'll go ahead and go up to our main interface. And what we'll do is we're going to create an instance reference that we can instance in Godot. So what we'll do is we'll go to our main interface script here, and we'll scroll up and we'll go ahead and say export, and we will say public packed scene weather daily short, and that should do it. So then if we come over here and we recompile, so if you click on this little build icon, it will actually build it in Godot, so that way we can see any changes we make. So if we go to our main interface, you'll see that we have our weather daily short right here. So what we can do is we can scroll down here and we can say weather daily short.tscn and drag it in just like that. And then if we go back to our main interface and we come down here to where we're doing our set main interface, what we can do is we can come in here, hit enter, tab, and say for each var item in, and we can say root dot daily, and that's going to pass back our daily weather. And then we can say weather day short, weather day short is equal to weather day short, I believe that's what we called it up here. Yep, weather daily short. So weather daily short dot instance as weather day short. Oh, I think I did it as a weather daily instead of weather day short. And that'll allow us to pass back that object. And then what we can do is we can say weather day short dot, and I believe we called it set texture and label data. So we'll say set texture and label data. And now we need to pass in our daily weather data. So we can literally just pass an item and that should do it for us. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and say node is equal to get node, and we need to pass in where we're going to put all that data set. Now you can see I have this as control node and we don't necessarily want that. So let's rename this to our daily weather short box. And I'm going to copy that and I will go ahead and say scroll container slash v box container slash daily weather short box slash h box container as node. And that's going to go ahead and pass back our node. And then what we can do is we can say node dot add child, and we can just pass in our weather day short. And there we go. So now if we hit play, we should get 8 of them, which we don't necessarily want 8 of them, but we'll fix that in a second. So you can see that we have all of our weather temps. It says temp here, which isn't great. So we're going to have to figure that out. And everything else seems to be working. Now we do have 8 like we expected. So that's good. You can see we have our partly cloudy, which is not what we wanted. You can see we're forecast to get a lot of rain, apparently, over here in Michigan. So what we'll do is we'll close this. We'll go back to our main interface. And to fix our extra item, what we'll do is we'll change this from a for each to a for loop. And what we'll do is we'll just go like this. We'll say in root.daily.count. And then what we'll do is we'll get rid of this little bit of code here. And then we'll have to say item doesn't exist. So what we can do is we can say daily item is equal to root.daily, and we will pass in our I, and that will solve that issue. Now, we don't want to start at 0. We want to start at 1, so that way we don't get our current weather. We get our future weather, right? So we'll go ahead and save that. And now for us to fix that temp issue, if you go to our weather daily short, you'll see that we have our weather data.temp, which in current weather works. But if you look at our daily weather, you'll see that temp is an object. So we need to say temp dot and then day or min or max. Okay, so in my case, I'm just going to say day. That way we have that data set. So we'll just come to our weather daily short, temp, and we'll say dot day, and that will go ahead and solve that problem. So now if we come into Godot here and we hit play and we run our project, it should instance all 7, 2, 4, 6, 7, and you can see our weather in Kelvin. And again, we're going to need to change that. But I mean, that's pretty much all we need for this. Awesome. So let's go ahead and change this to an imperial measurement or into Celsius. It's up to you guys. So what we can do to do that is if we go over to our main interface and we game manager and we go up to our request here, you can actually specify the type of units. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to where it says latitude and longitude. So one call question mark. And if I move this over a tiny bit so you guys can see better, one call question mark, latitude, longitude, and exclude and app ID, right? What we can do is we can add in an and we can say units is equal to, and here's how we set imperial, right? So we'd say imperial, or if you were doing metric, you would specify metric. So now if we save that, that should fix this issue. So if we hit play and we let it run, and there you go. Simple enough. Awesome. So that looks like our weather forecast for the entire week with our actual weather, which over here it's 34 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 1 degree Celsius, give or take. So it's pretty chilly over here. But you will notice that we do have a 0.86, and that's something that we may want to get rid of, right? You might not want to see, you know, that we're at 34.86, right? So what we can do is we can lop that off. So what we'll do is we'll come over to our main interface here. And instead of us doing root.current.temp.toString, we can say dot split, and we have to put in a char, so we'll split by our period, which is the decimal point, and then we'll pass back our first element in that array. So we'll pass back our 0 element, and that should solve that issue. And we'll do the exact same thing over in our weather day short, and we will go ahead and say toString dot split point and pull back our first element in that split. And that should be correct. We might need to flip it. I forget if it pulls the correct one or not. So we'll try that. And there we go. Simple enough. So now we have our weather basically working. So next, let's go ahead and add in our hourly forecast. So we'll have a little section here that says hourly, and then it will just kind of show our hourly forecast here. So what we'll do is we'll come over to our VBox container here. We're going to go ahead and right click it, add in another child node, and let's add in a label. And let's say something like hour forecast here. And what I'll do is I will go ahead and give ourselves a little bit of a left margin, so that way it's somewhere over here. We don't necessarily want to butt up directly against the edge because, you know, in an Android device, if it's all the way up against the edge, it's really hard to work with and see. So we'll give it a little bit of margin here, maybe 65. I think that'll look good. And then what we'll go ahead and do is we're going to right click our VBox container. We'll add in a child node, and we'll go ahead and add in a control node. And that control node is going to be called hourly forecast. And then we'll right click that, add in another child node. Let's add in a label here. And we'll call this hour time. Oops, I misspelled it. Time. And we will go ahead and duplicate this once. And we'll go ahead and say temp. And then we'll duplicate it again. And we will say temp value. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my temp. I'm going to drag this over somewhere in this general direction. And I'm going to grab temp and I'm going to drag it over here. And as a matter of fact, we should probably just put temp. And temp value will go with something like 56. And we'll just kind of drag it over here. And then hour time, we'll just say like 5 p.m. something like that, and we'll just put it right here. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab my hourly forecast, and I'm going to save branch as seen, and we will save it as hourly forecast. Now, if we go into our hourly forecast scene here, and we go ahead and right click, attach a script, and attach our hourly forecast script. And another thing that we're going to need to do once this figures itself out is we're going to need to tell this to be slightly larger. You can see how this doesn't quite encompass our stuff. And the reason why is because our minimum size is not quite correct. So we'll go over here, click on our hourly forecast, go to our rect, change our minimum size to something like 620. And then that will go ahead and force it so that way, no matter what, when we duplicate these guys, they're not going to overlap on each other. Now, we might want to give it a little bit more space than this because it's not quite good enough in my opinion. So maybe we should go with 30, maybe. Let's see how that looks. It's a little bit better because remember, we're getting 24 of these. So it's going to be quite a bit of data here. So now that we have this, we should be able to just remove this and go back to our hourly forecast, open up our script here in our hourly forecast, and we will say public void set hourly forecast values, and we'll pass in the hourly forecast. So if we go to our untitled JSON values here, you can see we have this hourly section. And you can see that each one is an hourly object. If I remember correctly, if I go to our model and we take a look, we should have an hourly section right here. See? So what we can do is we can take in a list, or we can take in our hourly object. So we'll go back to our hourly forecast and we'll just say hourly. And then what we'll say is get node. And we need to look at our nodes. Whoops, I grabbed Godot, not Visual Studio. We'll go over to our hourly forecast. You can see we have hourly time, temp, and temp value. So if we drag, I keep grabbing Godot, it's killing me. If we drag this over here, we can just say get node quote our time as label dot text is equal to hourly dot, and we can go ahead and take a look at this. And we have all sorts of values here. So I think we'll probably want DT, which is the time that it got, that it is predicting. And then what we'll do is we'll say, since this is an integer, we'll say utilities dot Unix timestamp to date time. We'll do that. And then we'll come over here, do that, dot, and then we have a bunch of time here. So let's go ahead and look at this. Get date time formats. I believe we want to use either time of day, or we could just pull back the hour itself, or we might be able to pull back. I forget if C# has a... It does not. So we'll say time of day, and that is a date time. So we'll say .to string, and that will do it for us. So now if we just go basically the same thing, get node, quote, temp as label dot text is equal to, and we will say hourly dot temp. Or I'm sorry, actually it's temp value, isn't it? So temp value. And then we need to set this to string. There we go. And that should basically do it for our hourly forecast. So now if we go back to our main interface here, right here, when we do our loop for this area, we basically need to do the same thing. So we can say for, and you'll see that we have our little for loop. So we'll just go ahead and hit enter on that. And that's perfectly fine. For our length, we'll say root.hourly.count. And then down here, we'll go ahead and say the exact same thing we have up here. So we'll say hourly is equal to root.hourly I semicolon. And then we need to go ahead and instance ourselves an hourly object. Now, we don't have that set up just yet, right? So we need to come up here and say export public pack scene hourly forecast object. And then we'll come down here and we will do exactly what we did up here. So hourly forecast is equal to hourly forecast object dot instance as hourly forecast semicolon, and that'll pull back our hourly forecast object. And then we can go ahead and set our date. So hourly forecast dot set hourly forecast values, and we need to pass in our hourly, so we can just pass in hourly. And then we need to go ahead and make it a child object of something, right? So what we can do is we can say get node, and we'll need to pull back our main scenes VBox container here. So we'll just go ahead and say get node scroll container slash VBox container. And then we'll say as node, and that'll pass back our node. And we can wrap this in parentheses, much like we've been doing, dot add child, and we can just add our hourly forecast. And there we go. And that's going to go ahead and instance our hourly forecast. So basically, we go ahead and fetch our current hourly forecast object, which is this little object right here. And then once we do that, we can go ahead and instance our object, which we set up here. And then we run that function, the hourly forecast objects function right here, to populate all of those values. And then we add it to our VBox container, which is this object right here. And it'll just add it right underneath this hourly forecast object. And that should basically do it. So now that we got to this point, let's go ahead and build. So that way it builds our project solution so we can set our object. And what we'll do is we'll go to our main interface and then drag our hourly forecast into it. So if we come up here to our hourly forecast, you'll see that we have this little object. We'll just drop that in. And then if we hit play, in theory, if we've done everything correctly, this should work. Or it'll crash. And there we go. So you can see that now we have all of our hourly forecasts. You can see I can scroll down. It'll tell you the temperature. You can see that what we need to definitely lop off the end there, but it tells you the temperature of each hour. And if we wanted to, we could put in different, different information here. So if you wanted to, you could have, the different weather icons. You could have stuff like that. But for the most part, it's basically working. Now, it's kind of weird that our weather says that we have rain for the next 7 days. We might want to look at that code because I don't think I'm actually expecting rain. Now, you also will notice that we have some overlaying issues here. So if we take a look at our daily weather box here, you'll see that our label needs to go underneath it. So let's take a look at what size this is. So it's Y of 107. So we'll go ahead and make this Y of 107. And that should stop it from having that issue. So that way we're not having that overlay problem. Now, if we go back to our main interface, let's take a look at what's going on with some of our objects here. Because if I go hit the API, because it's been, I've been recording this over a few days. So the weather has definitely changed quite a bit. So let me go ahead and just grab this value here. Let's open up Firefox, or should I say open up Brave here. And then let's just go ahead and paste right here and hit enter. And you'll see that I have an invalid app ID key, and that's because I made a mistake right here. So we'll go ahead and paste that in and make sure that you have your app ID key. Remember, we have it up here. If you need it, it's right here. So make sure you fetch that. And then we'll go ahead and hit enter, and you'll see that we get our forecast. And you can see that for our hourly, if we hit Control A, copy this, and then tab into our project here, and then we hit A, Control V, Control P, and format this document. Let's take a look at our hourly forecast and see what could possibly be going on, because something's going on here. Okay, so looking at it, we actually are getting pretty much rain and snow for the next little bit. At least that's what the API is telling me. So what we have is correct. It's actually correct data. So you can see we have snow, 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 rain, 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 and more snow. So it looks like it's literally just Michigan being bad weather. So what we'll do is we will go ahead and fix that. I guess we'll deal with what we have. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and fix this little temperature issue. And then we're going to go ahead and make a second tab. That way we can swipe to the right and have this slide over and show us the maybe like the 7-day forecast. Instead of this little small forecast, it'll show us a 7-day forecast that can give us a little bit more information, stuff like that. So what we'll do to fix this small issue is if we go to our hourly forecast, and when we pull back our temp.toString, we can go .split via period and pull back the first index and use that, and that should fix our problem. So if I stop this and we open up our project and we open up Godot, that should fix our issue. There we go. Nice. So we could put a heading right here that also says 7-day, right? And I think that would be a good idea. We'll pull this away from the wall here. I don't know why it didn't do that. And then we'll just duplicate this label, put it above our daily weather, and call it 7-day forecast. And it's still not wanting me to do it correctly. So I wonder if there's something I need to do on my end. Let's see. So it looks like the only real easy way to fix this would be to right-click our VBox container, add in a child node, add in a control node, and then bring it up here, drag in our label. And we'd have to tell our control node to have a minimum size of about 36 or so to cover the label. And then from there, we can move our 7-day forecast in to look a little bit better. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then I will do the same thing, right click, add in a control node. And I believe the size I said was 36. So we'll go ahead and come in here. Rect, minimum size is 36. We'll put that label inside of there. And we'll just go ahead and grab our label, pull it over a tiny bit. Make sure that we don't actually, let's reset all of our margins. Make sure it's the correct space. We'll pull this over just like that. Change this to our forecast label. And change this to 7-day forecast label. There we go. And that'll basically just make it a little bit cleaner, a little nicer to see and look at. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and build our second page. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to save this out as its own script here. So I'll just go ahead and right click it and we will say save branch as seen, main interface. Let's make sure nothing broke, so we'll refresh. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't necessarily want all of those elements in here. I just want some of them. So it looks like everything seems to work other than, yeah, everything seems to work. So that's good. I do want a little bit more space here, but again, this is all style stuff, so I'm not super concerned about it. But we can go into our main interface scene and kind of mess around with that right quick, just so I get a little bit more space between my hour forecast label here and the rest of it. So we'll go ahead and just give it a touch bit more space. So I will just go minimum size of maybe 40, maybe 60, and then just move that label down a tiny bit, just like that. And that'll give it just a little bit extra space. But we'll go back to our main scene. We're going to right click our control node, add in another child node, and let's add in a control node. And let's make that full rect like you would expect. And then we will right click it, add in another child node, and let's add in a panel, much like we did with the previous one. And let's also make that full rect. And then we're going to rename our control node to 7-day forecast, and that will work. And then we will right click that, add in another child node, and I will put in a VBox container. And inside this VBox container, which we are going to also make it full rect, so it's full screen. And inside this VBox container, let's go ahead and make it so that it has an object underneath it. So we'll right click it. We'll go ahead and add a child node, add in a control node, and then we'll right click our control node, add in a child node. Let's add in a label, and we'll go ahead and duplicate that label twice. And then we'll right click and add in a texture rect here. And that's basically everything that we're going to need for this object. So what we'll do is we'll call this 7-day forecast element. And we'll name this label the date. We will name this label the day. And we will name this label night. And let's go ahead and right click this, add a child node. Actually, let's go ahead and move this around. So we'll grab our texture rect. We're going to put it somewhere, I would say right about here-ish. I mean, we'll mess with it once we get going, but we'll say right about here. For our next element, which I believe is this one, our night element, we're going to come in here and say night, just like that. Simple enough. Day, we'll go ahead and grab that. Whoop, I grabbed my panel. Day, we'll grab that, bring it over, and say day. Actually, we'll go with day temp and night temp. I think that'll make more sense. And then we're going to need to actually get some labels under here. So let's go ahead and duplicate this, drag this over, and then duplicate this and drag this over. Like so. We'll just kind of drag these guys up and get them to be parented underneath them. So then I'm going to set this to something like 55, and day 2 we'll say 60, which I feel like I'm being overly ambitious for Michigan, but that's fine. So we will go ahead and take that. And then for our date, we'll just kind of drag this in here. Now for our texture rect, let's go ahead and drag our icon.png in here so we can see kind of how big it's going to be. and we'll just kind of finagle it so we can make it feel good. And our date, we'll go ahead and put in Monday, let's say, like that. So we'll just put it like this, and we'll grab our texture rect. I think that will work. And I think that'll do it. So first things first, you'll notice that our text is not correct. And that means that we need to change our theme, right? So what we can do is we can come into our 7-day forecast element, go to our theme, and you'll see that our theme is empty. So if we go to our main interface and we go to our theme, you'll see that we have our theme here. So what we can do is we can click on that theme, click the save as, and if you see this resource cannot be saved because it belongs to an edited scene, make it unique first. That's okay. Just go ahead and click OK and click on this little back icon and come down here, click on the little arrow icon right here, and then say make unique. And then we can click on our theme and click save as, and we will save it as our main theme like that. And then we can click on our 7-day forecast and you'll see that we have a main theme right here. If we drag this in here, it'll suddenly change all of our fonts. And that's the reason why I wanted to make that change, was because obviously since we did our changes, the font is slightly larger. So we'll need to kind of finagle our things so that they match, so that it works. So we'll go ahead and drag these guys out like so. And let's make it so that these guys are aligned. So we'll just kind of align them like so. And there we go. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and save our 7-day forecast element as a scene. And what we'll do is we'll right click, save branch as scene, 7-day forecast element. That's fine. We'll come up to where it says 7-day forecast element right here. We're going to go ahead and open up that scene. And let's make this proper sized. So we'll bring this up. And we will go ahead and change our minimum size to something like 130, and that will give us the proper sizing that we're looking for. And if I want to check my texture rect real quick, we can drag in our thunderstorm element, and it seems like that will work. So now we need to go ahead and code this so it hooks all this up and actually works, right? So what we can do is we can right click our 7-day forecast element and attach a script and go ahead and create one. Now, much like all of our other areas, we need to go ahead and create a function. So we'll say public void set 7-day forecast labels, and we'll pass in a daily, and we will go ahead and go from there. Now, something that you'll notice is we have an underline here. Okay. And you'll also notice that B, everything seems to be kind of broken a little bit. Now, I did this intentionally to show you guys something. So if you have a number inside of your class, Godot does not like that. I'm not sure if it's a C# thing or if it's a Godot thing, because I usually don't use numbers in my classes anyway, but it's something that you'll need to pay attention to. So instead, you need to name this 7-day forecast element, and then everything's happy. But if you do that, you should probably rename your script as well as to not be confused. So we can say 7-day forecast element. And now we're going to need to make sure we detach our script and then scroll down here to our 7-day forecast element and reattach it. That way we make sure that everything's good. So now that we pass in our daily and we have everything settled so that Godot is not angry, what we can do is we can go ahead and say get node, so parentheses get node, and we need to pull back all of our labels. So if we pull this over so we can take a look at our structure here, we'll pull back our date first. So we'll say date as label dot text is equal to daily dot, and then we can just go ahead and pull back our DT like we did before, our date time. And again, this is an integer, so we need to convert it. So we'll say utilities.unix date timestamp to date time. And we can go ahead and pass this in, and we can go dot day of the week dot to string, and that should work for us. Now we need to go ahead and set our day values. So if we change this to, let's say, day temp value, and then we can change this as well to night temp value. That's going to make it a little easier for us to see what we got to pull back. So we'll say get node day/day temp value as label dot text is equal to daily dot weather 0 dot temp dot, and you can see we have a bunch of different temperatures here that we can actually pull back. So we can pull back maybe the day temp or the evening temp, max, min, morning, night. So we'll go ahead and say, since this is the day temp, we'll say day dot to string, and we will go ahead and do the same thing, but with our night values. So get node night slash night temp value as label dot text is equal to daily dot temp dot night dot to string, and that should basically do it for our labels here. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and do our texture rect. So get node quote texture rect as texture rect dot texture is equal to, and now we're going to need to use our utilities. So utilities dot set texture, and we need to pass in our string weather. So we can say daily dot weather dot and pull back the first instance main, and that should do it for us. Simple enough. So now we need to go ahead and instance our 7-day forecast elements, right? So what we can do is we can just go back to our main scene, go to our 7-day forecast right here, right click it, attach a script, and name it our 7-day forecast, right? Because we can't have that number 7, right? So we'll go ahead and hit create. And basically, we're just going to do exactly what we did with our main interface. Same stuff. I know it's kind of boring, but it's basically the exact same stuff that we did here. So what we'll do is we will say public async void set main interface, right? So we will come into our 7 forecast and say public void set 7-day forecast. We'll pass in our root node, and we will go ahead and be able to pull back all of the data that we need for us to be able to populate this screen. So that way it becomes a very flexible screen. So what we need to do is we need to say for I in I.length, so root dot daily dot count, and then we can say daily is equal to root dot daily I, and then we can go ahead and do what we normally do. So we first need to instance our daily element and then put it underneath our VBox container, right? So we can scroll up here and say export, and then we can say public packed scene 7-day element. And I forgot if I called it forecast. I did call it forecast element, so I should probably stick with that. Forecast element, and then we can come down here and basically copy and paste our main interface code right here where we're instancing our stuff. So we'll just say 7-day forecast element. 7-day forecast element is equal to 7-day forecast. And if I remember correctly, we just called it forecast element. And I think that's going to get confusing really fast because we have the function or the class that's called 7-day forecast element, and then we have this. So maybe we should say element object just to make it a little simpler for us to kind of, you know, associate them. So 7-day forecast element object dot instance as, and if we look at what our original one was, and let me pull this over so we have a little more space. It's 7-day forecast element right there. And then what we can do is we can say get node, and the node that we're spawning this under is our VBox container, right? So it's just quote VBox container as node dot add child, and we'll pass in our 7-day forecast element just like that. And then we can go ahead and set our values. So 7-day forecast element dot 7-day forecast labels. And we got to pass in a daily, so we'll pass in our daily. And that basically does it. So now we come back here. Well, if we save and then come back here and we build, you'll see that our 7-day forecast should get a value right here. So we can go ahead and put in our 7-day forecast element. So we'll go ahead and find that. Let's see, 7-day forecast element. We'll drag that in. We'll go ahead and get rid of our current 7-day forecast element here, so that way we don't have anything extra. And then if we hit play, all right, and it doesn't seem to work. And I'm going to have to see why. Oh, because I'm not referencing it. That's my fault. Okay, so I didn't reference this, so therefore it's not going to run, so none of our stuff gets instanced. So if we go back to our game manager here, and we go ahead and call that function, so get node, if I remember correctly, it's just 7-day forecast. And we'll pass that in as a string. And we'll say as a 7-day forecast dot, and I believe I called it set 7-day forecast. So set 7-day forecast, and we'll pass in our root. There we go. And that should call it from now on. So that should work. So let's go ahead and save everything. And then let's go ahead and hit play. And we should see our 7-day forecast pop up. There we go. And it looks like we can't scroll. So we're going to need to fix that because obviously it goes past our days. But at least everything seems to be working the way that we would expect it to. Now we also have these guys, so we're going to need to do our splitting of our string so that way it doesn't do this, but everything seems to be working now. So what we'll do is we're going to right click our 7-day forecast, add in a child node. Let's add in a scroll container here, drag in our box container just like that, and make this full rect. That way it fully encompasses our thing. And then we can go ahead and fix our substring issue. So we'll go here. We will go to our 7-day forecast element here, and we will go ahead and say dot split by period. And we'll pull back the first element, and then we'll just basically copy this and paste it. And that will fix that little issue there. So now we should be able to scroll. We should have a VBox container. Let's make sure I'm correct before I move on. And we have a crash, so that's always a good sign. Node not found VBox container. And the reason why that is because in our 7-day forecast, we are just checking for the VBox container. We are not checking for the scroll container. So scroll container / VBox container. And then we'll go ahead and try that and see what that does. And that should work. There we go. And we can scroll. Awesome. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and set up swiping left and right to be able to move our panel left and right. So that way we can actually see our two screens. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to drag this 7-day forecast object. So I'm going to lock its children. You can actually click this little object right here, and that'll stop it from the children being selectable. We'll just drag this over just like that. So that way we have our two panels side by side. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a tween between these guys. So we're going to right click our control node. We'll go ahead and add in a child node and add in a tween node. And that's going to allow us to move our objects left and right. Now, how we detect our swipe is we're going to need to interrupt our input handling and basically catch that event and check to see if we're doing a swipe event. So what we'll do is we'll go into our main game manager here. Since this is something that affects the entire game, we want to make sure that we put it in our game manager. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and say public override void underscore input event. And then what we can do is we can say if at event is input event screen touch, then we can go ahead and say input event screen touch is equal to at event as input event screen touch. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to determine when they're touching the screen. And then what we can say is if touch.pressed, then we can say that we've started our swipe, right? We've started our movement of our finger. Now, this is going to be a little bit difficult because we need to basically keep track of our position. So what we'll do is we'll create a function variable up here, and it will be a vector2. So we'll say private, because no one else needs to access it, vector2 swipe start. And then we're going to go ahead and scroll down here and we'll say if touch.pressed swipe start is equal to touch.position. And then we'll say else we need to calculate our swipe, right? Because they must have let off, right? If the touch is not pressed, then that means they let it off. So we need to calculate our swipe. And we should probably put this in a separate function in case we ever need to calculate our swipe. So we'll say public void calculate swipe. We'll make that a vector2, and swipe end is what we'll pass in. And we'll say if swipe start is equal to a vector2 0, 0, then we don't want to do anything, right? You didn't do anything. You literally just by accidentally touched the screen and didn't move your fingers or anything like that. So we'll say return. That way it just doesn't cause any problems. And we need to make this a new vector2. That way it is a new vector2. We can't just, say vector2 out of nowhere. We have to actually have it exist. So then what we'll do is we'll say var swipe is equal to swipe end minus swipe start. And that's going to take our value that we touched and let off, and it'll say how big of a distance did they move their finger. If they moved their finger past a specific point, then we're going to calculate our swipe and say, yep, we're good to go. So what we'll say is if math f dot absolute value swipe.x is greater than 100, then let's go ahead and check which direction we're swiping. So we'll say if swipe.x is greater than 0, then we need to swipe right. Else, we're going to need to swipe left, right? And if we swipe left, then we know that we're going back to our base point. So we can go ahead and just say swipe start is equal to a new vector2. And that should go ahead and allow us to just have that as well. Now, one of the things that we need to code is our swipe left and right. So first, I'll go ahead and put our calculate swipe in here. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and test this first. So we'll say gd.print swipe right, and then we will do the same thing for swipe left. Now we might need to flip these. I forget which one's left and which one's right, but we'll go ahead and just take that. And now, did I spell calculate wrong? Nope. No argument giving. Oh, that's why. So what we'll do is we'll say, for the argument, we'll say touch position, and that'll just pass in our vector2 for our position. So now, if we come in here and we hit play, and we let it build and attempt to run and see, hopefully it builds. If we swipe to the right or swipe to the left, you'll see that nothing's happening. And the reason why is because we are trying to intercept a touch event here. You can see up here, we're saying if input is a screen touch. And since we're using our mouse, we don't actually have a touch that's going on. So what we need to do is we need to go to our project settings. So underneath, I believe it's under input pointing right here. So on input devices pointing, you can go ahead and emulate touch from mouse. So we can go ahead and hit that as on. And then when we close this and we hit play, it should fire off our event, hopefully. So let's see what happens if we do that. So we'll let this load. We'll swipe to the left, and you'll see that it says swipe left. So we swiped from right to left. And if we swipe to the right, it'll say swipe right. So we are swiping to the right, swiping to the left. Simple enough. So we got everything basically working. So now what we can do is we can go back to our code here, and we need to go ahead and set up our code here. So that way we can actually move our swipes, right? So we can actually move our objects. So what we can do is we can go ahead and say, okay, private void swipe right. And what we'll do is we will go ahead and grab our tween. So we'll say tween is equal to get node. And I believe we just called it tween as tween. And that needs to be a capital T. And then what we'll do is we'll say tween dot interpolate property. And what we're going to do is we're going to interpolate one of our properties. So we need to pull back our 7-day node, right? And what we should probably do is we should probably make references to our 7-day node and our main node, okay? So what we can do is we can just say 7-day forecast. 7-day forecast is equal to get node. And we'll go ahead and grab our 7-day forecast like that as a 7-day forecast. And I need to capitalize my S because I keep forgetting. There we go. And then what we'll do is we will go ahead and interpolate that property. So we'll go into our interpolate property right here, and we will go ahead and say 7-day forecast, comma. And what we need to do when we interpolate properties, we need to first choose what object we're interpolating, which in this case is 7-day forecast. So we'll pass that in. Then we need to do a property. So we're going to do rect transform, or rect position, I should say. So rect underscore position, comma, and then we have to choose our starting point, what our initial value is, which in this case is just going to be its current position. So 7-day forecast dot rect position. And then we need to say where to place it. Where are we putting this object? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass it into a new vector2. And we'll pass in something like, 270, 0. And that's just an arbitrary number that I came up with. So we'll see if that's the right number. And then we'll say how long. So 0.1f. So a 0.1 of a second. And then we'll say tween.start. All right. Now let's do the same thing for swipe left. So private void swipe left. And what we'll do is we'll do exactly the same thing, but we're just going to basically reset it to its initial position. So its initial position, if I remember correctly, is basically 0. So, or I guess if we're swiping, well, we'll figure it out when we get there, I guess, because I'm not quite sure. Positioning things in 3D space is always confusing. So we'll go ahead and just set this to 0, 0. And that should do it. So if we look at our 7-day forecast, we look at its rect position, it's actually 601. So let's set it to 600 like that. And then let's just copy that and use 600 instead of 270. I just guessed 270, but I am definitely wrong. So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and make our link to these guys. So where it says swipe right, we'll say swipe right. And then where it says swipe left, we'll say swipe left. And I'm going to need to change that to a lowercase s to maintain our standards. So let's do that real quick. All right. And now if we hit play, let's see if this works. All right. So we got all of our stuff in here. I swipe and we move over. I swipe, it moves over. Awesome. Simple enough. Now, do we want it to work kind of like a drawer where it comes in like this? Or do we want to move this with the object as well? And that's kind of a dealer's choice. It's up to you guys on how you guys want to do this. But I mean, really, that's basically all we need to do. You can see that if we click, it seems like sometimes we can scroll. Not always, I've noticed. And also, we should probably change this instead of hour forecast is 24-hour forecast because that it gives us, I believe, 24 hours. It gives us actually a little bit more than 24 hours. So we might want to cut this off after 23 hours or whatever. But we can burn that bridge when we get there. All right. So now the next big thing is we should probably put buttons down here in a drawer so that way we can actually see if we want to click on them to kind of show different menu tabs. I think that would probably be a good idea. And we also should probably make it so we can scroll with our thumb. You'll notice that on this screen, it doesn't really let us. So we got to figure that part out, but we can on this one. So there's probably something funky going on here with how it's handling mouse input. So, or I guess finger input, I guess would be the right value here. So that's kind of what's going to be next on our docket is basically let's create this bottom bar and then figure out why we can't scroll here. And we'll fix this as well. So first on our docket, we'll fix this. Second, we'll put this in. And third, we'll figure out why we can't scroll. All right. So let's go to our main interface. Let's go up here and say if I is over than our daily count, that's fine. For our hourly count, if we are over 24 hours, then we don't want to continue. And that will pretty much fix that problem, I believe. So let's hit play and let's see. If we scroll down, it only gives us the 24 hours like we would expect, and that's perfectly fine. And this still works just fine. Cool. So now let's make a little tab right down here. So we'll come to our control node, right click, add in a child node, add in a panel. And let's go ahead and make that panel on the bottom. So we'll say bottom wide, and we'll lift this up just a touch like that. And what we'll do is we'll right click, add in a child node, and add in a button, and we'll add in 2 buttons. So we'll take this button, put it in the bottom right. So we'll say bottom right, and we'll pull this button out, something like this. Let's make it basically full rect. Well, I don't really want to make it full rect. Let's change the color of our panel real quick so we can actually see what's going on. Go to our theme overrides and change our panel to a different color. So we'll do a style box flat. And let's give it a nice, I don't know, Godot blue color. So we'll just give it maybe this color. I think that's a good color. Since this is a Godot tutorial, we should probably, stick with the stylings that is Godot. And we'll just kind of drag this guy in kind of like this. Maybe give it a bit of space like that. And we'll just say 7-day forecast like that. There we go. And we'll do the same thing. We'll duplicate this button and we will say bottom right or bottom left. I'm sorry. Apparently I don't know my left and rights. So we'll say bottom left like that. And we'll bring this over something like that. And we'll call this main page. There we go. We'll say 7-day forecast and main page. Awesome. So now when we press down on our 7-day forecast, we're going to go ahead and connect an event to our control node. So go ahead and on button down, 7 forecast on button down. And it didn't create our function because I forgot that it doesn't do that sometimes. So we'll go ahead and edit this and grab this, copy it, hit cancel, go back to here and say private void 7-day forecast on button down. And when this is pressed, we need to go ahead and go to our 7-day forecast, which, if I remember correctly, is swipe right, I think. Let me see. Swipe left. Good thing I checked it. So we'll say swipe left, just like that. And on main page, button down, let's copy that, connect it to our control node, and do the same thing. And say private void on main button down, swipe right. And that should basically do it for our little bottom bar. So if we hit play, if we click our 7-day forecast, it'll take us over to our 7-day. If we click main page, it takes us back. Cool. Now see, that worked for a split second. I was able to scroll down. See, now I can scroll down, but only like right here. I think these objects are interrupting the event to tell the scroll bar to go through, but these ones aren't, I think. Because if I'm on here, does that... Well, it doesn't really stop it, but it does stop it when we're on an image. So it must be a collision issue, would be my guess. So let's go ahead and run this down and try to find it. All right, so I think I figured out what's going on. So if we go to our weather box, you can see that in our mouse section right here, we have our filter set to stop. And what that means is that mouse event does not go through the canvas and it just stops right there. So if we change this to either ignore or pass, it should allow us to do our thing. So if we look at some of our other objects here, so if we go to mouse, you can see we have pass. Come here, look at our mouse, ignore, that's fine. So that should also be set to pass then. Yep. And if we come over here and we go to our mouse and we say pass, and we do the same thing here, mouse, pass, come here, mouse, pass, and then we can go ahead and do the same thing on our 7-day forecast. So let's go to our 7-day forecast. Go to our, actually, it won't be under our 7-day forecast. It would be underneath our 7-day forecast element. We'll want to go ahead and do the same thing. So mouse, filter, pass it, and that should about do it, I think. Yeah, so if we go ahead and we hit Control S and we hit play, let's see what happens. Well, now it still kind of works. It works definitely on this element. It works on this element. It does not work on this element and does not work on any of these guys. So we're going to need to go into these guys and change them as well. So we'll open up our hourly forecast, click on this guy, go to mouse, go to ignore. So that will work. And then go into our, I believe we called it weather day short as well. And go in here and say, ignore or pass. It doesn't really matter. We'll go ahead and hit play, see if that works. And there we go. So that should work. Yeah, that should work. Cool. Awesome. So now that we're at this point, Now let's export it out to Android and see if everything works. And if everything works, then all we need to do is get our location, probably print our location up here. And I think we should be good to go. So I guess what I'll do is first, I'm going to come up here, go into our main interface here, go up to the top here. Let's add in a label. So we'll right click, add in a child node. Let's add in a label. And we'll go ahead and make it, I don't know, about this big. We'll say something like Detroit. And let's make it about yay big. We'll throw it right about here. And let's throw that into our VBox container at the top. So we'll minimize these guys. Because something that didn't occur to me was that we would need to, have our actual, label here. So we'll go ahead and right click and add in a control node. And call this title. So we'll say title. There we go. And we'll go ahead and make this a minimum size of maybe 60. I think that's enough space. And then we can grab our label, make it about yay big, give or take. And we will go ahead and make it larger. So we'll go to our theme overrides here, and we'll go ahead and go to our fonts. Font, and let's add in a new dynamic font, and let's drag our font data into here like that. And then let's change our size to something larger, something like Detroit, like that. And that should about do it. That way we have a big representation of where the weather is at. And then we'll go to our main interface. And when we add in our stuff, we'll go ahead and fetch our Detroit label. So we'll go ahead and say get node, scroll container, /vbox, container /title /label as label dot text is equal to root dot, and in here there should be something that we can use for our location. So if we go to our untitled little JSON data set here and we minimize all of this, you'll see that we have time zone America Detroit. So that might work. But that's just our time zone. So do we actually have a location name? I don't think we do. So we might need to resolve our location separate, I'm thinking. Because I'm kind of curious how this is going to affect, like if I were to be in, Grand Rapids, which is another place in Michigan. Let me grab Brave real quick and let's check. So we'll grab Grand Rapids latitude and longitude here, and we'll go ahead and say 42, 96, 85, 66. So if we go to our API and we change this to 42, 96 and 82, I believe we had 85, 66. So we'll say 85, 66. Let's see if that comes back. Yeah, it comes back with America Detroit, which is a problem. So we're going to need to figure out a way to resolve our latitude and longitude. So I think what we'll use is Nominathium. I don't know how to quite say that, but I think we'll use these guys as API. It's free and it allows us to look up an ID. So when we run this little bit of code here, or this little URL here, and we input our latitude and longitude as a reverse lookup, we get back this data set. So I'm thinking that this will probably be what we want to do. Unfortunately, it's XML, which means it's going to be a pain to use, but I think that might be our best bet because they really don't have any special, any cost to it or anything like that. So what we can do is we can actually, I think they have parameters that we can do. So I think we can do and
Let me see. Format is equal to JSON. There we go. And we can get back our JSON here. So that should work pretty well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to our convert JSON to C# classes. If you guys remember this tool that we used earlier, we'll go ahead and convert that over to classes. So that way we have this data set. And instead of having it called root, we'll just call it something like verse lookup or something. And I'm just going to grab this little bit of class code here and go to my model class object here and come down here to the bottom and basically just paste that in. And that should allow me to get back all of the data set I think that we need here. So now what we can do is we can pull back our latitude and longitude. So let me come into my game manager here. Let's scroll up to the top and say public string latitude is equal to, and I believe our latitude and longitude is 42.33 semicolon public string. Well, actually, no, I'll just say Latin lon. I think Latin lon is enough for us to understand what it is. So we'll say Latin lon quote, and we'll say minus 83.04. Now we're going to come down here and go ahead and set that. So we'll say end quote plus lat plus quote plus lon. Whoops, actually. And lon is equal to quote plus lon plus quote. And that should basically handle it. Now, if you want to do, you know, a little bit more fancy string manipulation, you guys can. You can actually just do like a, you know, like a $sign or an @ symbol here. Then you can make this into a, you know, you don't have to do these pluses and string concatenation. But I'm just going to do it this way because it's a little simpler for people to understand. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and say, okay, that's going to be our latitude and longitude. And we'll need to get another HTTP request object. So let's do that. So let's go to our main scene. Let's duplicate our HTTP request object. Let's name it our name resolution. And let's go ahead and say HTTP request name resolution request is equal to get node h quote, and I believe I named it name resolution as HTTP request, and we'll go ahead and say name resolution request dot request, and we'll pass in our request. And in this case, our request, I already have it here. So we'll come over to our API call. We'll copy that and paste that in. And you'll see here that we have our latitude and longitude. So we'll unquote, quote, unquote, and quote. And then we'll just go ahead and do plus plus lon like that. And then we'll take this plus plus lat just like that. And that should do it for that. Now we're going to need to hook up an event just like we did at the beginning. So what we'll do is we'll say on HTTP request completed, right? And then we'll do this exact same thing, but just down here. So we'll go back to Godot here. We will go to our name resolution node on request complete. Let's disconnect that method and connect a new one and connect it to our control node, and on name resolution, which I forgot as always, because for some reason in C# it doesn't create this function. So we'll go ahead and copy that and say public void on name resolution completed int result. And actually, instead of coding all of this, let's just go ahead and grab all of this bit here. So we'll just copy that, paste, and then we'll go ahead and start coding our stuff. So we're going to do the exact same thing we did last time. So string data is equal to encoding dot utf8 dot get string body, and then we'll go ahead and say, I believe our model object was called reverse lookup. So we'll say reverse lookup. Reverse lookup is equal to our JSON convert dot deserialize object reverse lookup, and we'll go ahead and say data. Awesome. So now from here, we can take this data and use it how we want. Now, the nice thing about this is if we look at our, and let me just kind of start deleting some of these guys because they're starting to become, difficult to work with. So we'll just kind of close a lot of this. If we look at our model, you can see that we have our display name, our address, which is an address type here. So we really could pull down exactly where somebody lives if we wanted to. Now, obviously, we shouldn't do that. A, for, I don't want to dox myself, and B, because it's probably not a good idea anyway to show someone's exact location. So what we can do is we can just pull back the city and the state. I think we'll be fine. So what we'll do is we'll say get node, and I'll pull this over, and let's see. So I think we're going to need to set this in our main interface. So let's open up our main interface real quick, which I just closed the script for that. And we'll go ahead and say enter tab public async void set location. And we'll pass in I believe it's, what kind of thing is this? Reverse lookup. And then what we'll say is get node. And the node that we are looking for, if we go to our main interface, we are looking for our title. So we'll say get node scroll container / vbox container / title / label as a label, like we usually do. And then we'll just say dot text is equal to reverse lookup dot address dot, and then this is where we can start really getting some fun stuff in here. So we can just say city plus reverse lookup dot address dot state. Now this would work, but we need a space in between here. So we can do one of two things. We can either hit ++ and then do quote like this and space. Or what we can do is we can say quote $, and then just do a space in between the two values and do curly braces between them like this. It's up to you on which one you guys prefer, but I decided that it would be good to show you guys both methods. So that is the same as that ++ one as well. So now that should basically handle it for us. So if we go back to our game manager and we look at our code, make sure everything looks correct, that should be fine. So if we call it right here, we could just say basically get node main interface like so dot, and I believe we said set location. So set location. And we'll pass in our reverse lookup, just like that. Awesome. So now, if we hit play, let's see what happens. Well, we have a failure, so that's always a good sign. Looks like we're missing a semicolon, so let's see. This is where we were going to set the title label earlier, but we don't need to do that because we needed to break that out into its own thing. So that's perfectly fine. So let's hit play. And you'll see it says Detroit, Michigan. It's 41 degrees. That's our weather. That's our hour forecast. And if we swipe, it's actually coming together. It's starting to look like an actual app. So that's really cool. So now let's get this on our phone and let's see how it goes. All right, so now that I have my phone connected, you'll see that I don't have an Android guy there. And the reason why is because I have not set up my export properties yet. So what we'll do is go to Project, export, and add in a new Android template. Now you'll see that I don't have any export templates, so I'm going to need to download all of those. So I will be right back. If you guys haven't done this before, just click on Manage Export Templates and just make sure you click Download and Install, and it'll pull down all of your export templates. So this is going to take a minute, so I will be right back. All right, so now that it's installed on my machine, I'm going to go ahead and click Close, Project, Export, and you'll see that all those errors have gone away. So now if I make sure that my phone is plugged in, if everything's set up correctly, I should be able to plug this in. And it should pick up my phone right up here, providing that everything's done correctly, which it might not be. It depends on how it feels. And there it is. So you can see that my guy's right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the screen recorder on my device. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on the Android button. And you'll see that it's going to try to compile it and export it out into my Android phone. So it might take a second, but I will be right back once it's done. All right, it tried to boot up. It just crashed. And did it give us any errors or anything? It just straight up crashed, eh? So let's try running it one more time and see what happens. Because if it crashes without any warning, usually that's kind of funky. So I'm kind of interested in why. All right, so that's the second time it crashed, so we know something's up. So what we'll do, we'll go up to debug, and we will say deploy with remote debug. That will allow us to actually see what's going on our device. And I don't know if you caught that with that little flash that we had there, but our Windows position is incorrect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my project settings here, and I am going to come down here to Window, Display, and I am going to set my orientation to portrait. That way it's actually the correct orientation for this project. So I'm going to hit run. We'll see if anything comes up in Godot as an error. And if it doesn't come up, then we're going to need to figure something out here. It might be that we don't have privileges, or it could be a lot of different things. So we may need to ADB logcat, or we might be able to get away with just this remote debug. All right, so it looks like a monocore API hash mismatch, and no loader found resource weather icon semi-cloudy, weather icon semi-cloudy, but it did load, which is a good sign. If I flick to the left, it works. And if I scroll down, it works. So awesome. At least we have this working, and it does work like we would expect. Now, it would be nice if this interface was not full screen. And I don't know if we can get away with going into our project settings and checking out our Windows settings and maybe turning off full screen, but it looks like full screen is off. So I'm not sure if there's a way for us to actually show our home indicator and things like that. I wonder if maybe there's something in here, but I'm not seeing anything in here. So I don't think we can pull that off, which is unfortunate. And if you guys know, maybe throw them in the comments below. But at the end of the day, we still have it working. Everything seems to be okay. And my cable is failing me right now, but that's okay. So our little weather app is actually starting to work. So now let's add location services to this, because we need to get the user's location so we can determine where their weather is located, right? So what we'll do is we'll go ahead, and I'm going to go to project, install Android build template. Let's go ahead and install our Android build template. That's going to allow us to do a custom compile of our project. And let's go to the asset library and see if we have anything for location. Well, I'm not seeing anything in here. So let's go ahead, go to my own repo here, and
grab this release here. Let me see if you guys can see this. Yeah, so this little release right here. And I'm going to go ahead and pull down this AAR and this GDAP file. So we'll just pull these two down. Now, this is a plugin already created from somebody else. I actually forked it from that guy. But I put out a PR, and it looks like he merged it into his branch, but he doesn't have a simple release for us to download. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this one, and I'm just going to download the AAR file. So go ahead and download the AAR file and the GDAP file. One of the things that I always tell people is when you are running a repo in GitHub, please put out your releases when you're at a good stopping point on your project, because a lot of developers don't want to compile your stuff. So that's just something to keep in mind. So please, while you guys are working on your stuff, if you get to a good stopping point, just allow the developers to have a release so that way they have something that they can download. It just makes things a little easier. So now that I have these guys, let me go ahead and show those in folder. So I have these two guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy them. I'm going to go out to my Godot. I'm going to go into my Android, into my plugins, and I'm going to right click, open in File Manager, and I'm going to paste the plugin right here. And you guys can't see that. So there we go. Right here in the actual project. So then I'm going to hit close. I'm going to go to project, export, and you will see that we have a location plugin. Let's go ahead and hit on, and you'll see this says, hey, you need to use a custom build. So let's go up here to our little custom build and click on. Perfect. That will work. And let's click close. So now that we have that, let's go into our main scene here, our main little project. And something that kind of stinks about C# support inside of Godot is we can't directly use add-ons in C# because of how it gets handled. You can't just call the plugin because the plugin doesn't technically exist in C#. You would need to recompile the plugin to work in C#, which keep posted. I will have a video on how to compile a plugin for Mono and how to use it. But for right now, let's just do it the other way. So what we'll do is we will right click our control node. We'll add in a child node, and we'll just add in a control node and just call it a location node. We'll say location finder. And we'll right click that, attach a script, and don't attach a C# script, but attach a GD script. Let's go ahead and click create. And on ready, we're going to try to fetch our user's location. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and first get our location permission. So we'll say get underscore tree dot connect quote on underscore request underscore permissions underscore result comma self comma quote result, and then we'll say if os dot request underscore permissions then result empty comma true. And that'll allow us to call a function called results. Now, the method doesn't quite exist yet, but we're going to go ahead and build that. So let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can actually see what I'm doing here. So then what we can do is we can say func result permission comma granted. And then we can say if granted, then let's go ahead and start using our location plugin. So we'll say if engine dot has underscore singleton location plugin, then we're going to need to go ahead and set ourselves a location plugin. Now I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say var location plugin, and I'll say location plugin is equal to engine dot get underscore singleton location plugin. And now from here, we got to connect all of our signals that are available to us. So we can say location plugin.connect, and we'll go ahead and connect on location updates, comma, self, comma. We'll go ahead and say got location update. And we'll go ahead and say location plugin.connect, and we'll go ahead and connect on last known location, comma, self, comma, and we're going to create a function called got last known. Now from here, we need to go ahead and actually create these functions here. So what we can do is we can say func got location update, just like that. And it's going to pass in our location data. And then what we can do is we can go ahead and call our C# functionality from there. Now, we don't really know how we're going to do that just yet, so we'll go ahead and pass that for now. And we'll say func got, if I remember correctly, it was got last known, so we'll go ahead and grab that. And that will also give us our location data. So we'll go ahead and do that. And we will pass that as well. So what we need to do is we need to be able to call back to our C# code whenever we want to get our location and last known and things like that, right? Well, to get our location, we need to call a function that kind of just goes and fetches it. So what we'll do is we'll say func get location, and we will go ahead and say location plugin dot get last known location, just like that. And that will call our last known location, which should call maybe our got last known or our location update, depending on what it's looking for. So what we can do is we can go ahead and try to call our C# code. And what we need to do is we need to get a reference to our node that has the code that we're trying to call. So in this case, we're trying to get a hold of our game manager, right? So we can actually use our game manager to do this. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and just attach a group to this object, to our control node, and that way we can call this back. So we'll just say game manager, and that'll allow us to have that group for that. And then we can just go into our location tool, and we can just say, hey, when I get location updates, let me go and tell my so what we'll do is we'll say get underscore tree dot call get nodes in group quote game manager, and it's going to return back 1 dot, and we got to call a function, right? Because we have that location data now. So we're going to need to call a function. So what we can do is we can go into our game manager here, and we can basically just come down here and say public void get, we'll say receive. And I'm not sure what kind of data we're going to get back. So let's go with object. We'll say object lock data, because I'm not sure what kind of data is going to come back from here. I imagine that it's going to be something simple to use, but I'm not sure. So we'll say gd.print our object. So what is that? Location data. So we'll go ahead and print that data set. And like I said, I'm not sure exactly what kind of data is going to come back. So I don't want to be like, oh yeah, it'll be fine, right? And now we're going to need to not update our interface until we get our location data. So we'll scroll all the way up to our ready statement here and grab all of this, copy it. Actually, we'll cut it because I don't think we should copy it. We'll come down here and we'll paste it. So that way it waits until we get our location data back. And then we're going to come up here and we're going to get a reference to our GD script inside of C#. So what we'll do is we will say get node and let's fetch our node for our project. So I believe I called it, oh, I don't remember, location manager or location finder, which makes sense. So we'll say location finder as a node, and we will wrap that in parentheses. And that's going to just make things a little easier. And we'll say dot call, and we're going to call our function. And we have to call it via name. So we're doing this via reflection, which is extremely slow. So working between GD script and C# is very slow. That's not to say that you shouldn't do it. It's just to say that it is slower than doing it, directly. So we'll say got location updates. I think we actually want to get our location. So we'll say get location, and we don't need to pass anything in. So we're good to go right there at the moment. And then on the other side, we need to call our function. So what we can do is we can just straight call it via name. So we'll just kind of come down here and use our receive location data. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste that in here. I'm going to do that. I'm going to pass in my lock data. And that should about do it for our little script here. Hopefully this works, because to be honest with you, I'm not sure if it's going to. But in theory, this should work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this out to my Android device, and I might need to pause and come back because this might not work. Now it asked me for my location, so I hit yes, and let's see what happens. Not invalid call, non-existent function, get last known location. So that's not a good sign. I thought that was the plugin's function, but let's go ahead and kill this for right now. So we'll stop it, and you can see that the thing loaded, but it didn't do anything because it obviously errored out. So get last known location, maybe that's not what I'm looking for. So let me double check. See, it's get last no location. That's my fault. That should probably be changed. So maybe I'll fix that and put a PR in for that. So what I'll do is I will change that to get last no location. And let's rebuild this and see what happens. Hopefully we'll get lucky and this will all just work like magic. And then we can continue. And it should pop out with a little output that basically tells us what kind of data is going to come back. And then we can try to figure out how we can cast this data. I haven't gotten anything, so that's not a good sign. All right, so I figured out what it is. So we had everything correct after we changed this to last no location, but I forgot to add this to my got last known location. So it didn't know what to do with that data, if that makes sense. It just kind of ran this function and ran off, right? It didn't actually do anything. So now that we have it like that, let's go ahead and check out our ADB logcat. So I did this while you guys weren't here, but basically if you open up a command prompt and type ADB logcat, and we'll run that, and it's going to be this big value. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab all of that and go ahead and paste that. And let's take a look to see if anything got dumped out. So you'll see it did run. So that's cool. You'll see also that we have all of our data. It got logged properly, which we might not want to do in the future, but right now that's fine. If we scroll up just a tiny bit, you'll see that we have some additional data. And also I'm going to change this to a log so that way it colors it correctly. We have our API mismatch mismatch, but that's fine. If we scroll up a few, let's see. We have empty, Godot rendering is on, Godot starts, which is fine. So it looks like our print did not run, or if it did run, it didn't work. So let's take a look at our game manager, receive location data, and I didn't print my location data, so that's why. So we'll say gd.print because I thought I printed it. Lock data, and then let's go ahead and put a semicolon there, and let's take a look at what kind of data comes back here, because we're now kind of getting into the territory of a random object that can come back from some developer. So we don't want to, we want to handle it in a specific way. We don't want to make mistakes here. You know what I mean? So what we'll do is that print should show up in our logcat. So let's go over here. Let's hit Control A, Control V. Let's go up and let's see if we get any additional data sets that we can mess with. So, all right. So it looks like this is going to be the data set that we get back right here. So I'm going to have to be super careful about this because obviously I don't want you guys to see exactly where I live. So what we'll do is I'm probably going to blur out the line that I have selected here. But what I'll do is I will come in here and edit some of this data real quick so that it just kind of shows my vague location. And we'll go ahead and grab this, copy it, and I'm going to paste it in here, Control-Shift-P, and we'll format our document. And it's not a light top type log, so we'll say JSON, and then we'll Control-Shift-P and format. And it doesn't look like the data that came back was proper format. Let me see. It's not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat this a tiny bit. And I'm just going to pull back the latitude and longitude here. So you can see we have our latitude and longitude. So what we can do is we'll just pull back this and send that back. Instead of sending back like the entire object, let's just send back that. So what we'll do is we'll say receive location data dot, and I think it's latitude. So we'll pass latitude, comma, lock data dot, and I believe it's longitude. So go ahead and pull that in as well. That way it could just pull back that data set and I don't have to play this game. So that should work. So what we'll do is we'll go into our C# here. We'll go to Game Manager. And instead of passing in our object lock data, we'll say object lat, comma, object lon here. And then we can go ahead and just say, okay, that's going to be our latitude and long, right? So we can say lat is equal to lat dot to string. And then we can say lon, capital L, is equal to lon dot to string. And that should give us back the correct values here for what we're trying to do. And then from here, this should all just work. So if done correctly, when I come up here and I set these guys to nothing, like so, it should come back with Detroit, Michigan, regardless. It should come back with my general area. So let's go ahead and test that and see what it does. And like I said, I may or may not need to blur some stuff out because I don't necessarily want you guys to have my exact location. You know, if it says, hey, you live in this exact city, I don't know if I'd want you guys to have all that information. So let's see if this works. It does seem to kind of work, but it looks like I'm missing some stuff here. So you can see that we are cloudy. We're missing an icon. We're also missing some data with where we're located. So let me go ahead and see what's going on. So it looks like it did work, but you can see we got our latitude, longitude. It says America, Detroit. So it pulled back the proper weather. We are getting some weirdness with our icons, so we might need to look at that. But we are having some funkiness maybe with our other call because it just says Michigan. So I'm kind of curious. So let me check to see if we are printing out our location data. There we go. So what was wrong? And like I said, I'm probably going to need to block out my actual address on my phone. But what was going on was, if we look at the code that comes back here, you'll see that I pulled out all my information here, but you'll see that we get town instead. So you see that? And town is not going to work for what we're trying to do, right? We did ours off of city. So what I did was I added town to the model right here. And then I went and I added in my main interface here. I did a little check, which you can see I'm printing out all this data to see what's going on. But I did a check right here where I just said, hey, if our city is null, then go ahead and return the town value. And if it is not null and it has a value, return the city data. Because it depends on where you live. If you live in a city, it's going to come back with some city data. If you have town, it comes back with town data. So we got to make sure that we keep that in check right there. So you can see that I had to do a little bit of funky checking here to handle that. So now that that's working, we need to figure out what's going on with our little icon here that is null. My guess is what's going on is it's coming back with the, let me get rid of you and you, so that way we don't have any mishaps on my end. My guess is that what comes back is probably not any good. So what we should probably do is we should probably go out to our utilities function and see what kind of data is getting passed to it. And I'm going to do a quick pass to kind of delete anything that could possibly, you know, dox me. So I'm going to be right back, and then we will go ahead and see what's going on with our utility texture data. All right, so now that I deleted all that data and ran through and deleted all my print statements pretty much, let's go out to my utilities and let's just print our weather data here. So we'll print this, and I'm guessing what's going on is I think we have one of these guys that's not quite coming back correctly. I think Godot was warning us of that, but I didn't see the error. And my guess is maybe it's semi-cloudy because it's actually supposed to be lowercase s. So let's make that a lowercase s right here. And then let's go ahead and click on our Android run, and let's see if that fixes our issue. I don't know if it's going to, but hopefully it does. And then I think we'll be able to call it a day after this. All right. And that was pretty much it. So now you can see that we have that partly cloudy showing up as well. Awesome. So, I mean, that's basically how you make a basic weather app inside of Godot. Now, I know I didn't cover everything that I could have covered, and we probably could have gone way more in depth, but this should be a good primer for you guys to, you know, pull back data, be able to get location data, and kind of have a complete app under your belt. So that way you have something that you can, you know, expand upon and make cooler. Now, next up on my list is to see how the new 3.5 changes is going to help or harm Android apps inside of Godot. So one of the things that they added was low power mode for Android, which is really useful for apps like these. So I want to see how big of a difference in battery life it's actually going to give us. So now that we have an app, we can actually test how much it affects battery life if we use low power mode or not. So look forward to that video. But that is all I have for you guys today. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, if you dislike this video, go ahead and hit that dislike button because I am here to make content for you guys. This video, as with all of my videos, are viewer suggested. So if you have any suggestions, please throw them in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to get to them. I know that there's a lot of suggestions and my list is huge. So your suggestion will get done. It's just a matter of when and how much time I have. But I'm always happy to take a look at really cool ideas. And hey, if you have any questions or comments, throw them in the comments below or jump on our Discord. and any of the guys that are there are more than happy to help you with your problem. Link is in the description below. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you all next time. Thanks.